Thank you. Mark Tinka again, TransmissionCo. Yesterday, we spent a little bit of time on SDM, which is the spatial division multiplexing that we looked at, describing how we expand capacity on the subsea. So today, we're going to go from back to front and just talk about what subsea is and what the components are. How many of you, obviously, I believe most of you would know that the bulk of the internet is coming subsea, not satellite anymore. Does anybody here have any experience with what subsea is, what it looks like, beyond just knowing that it's in the sea? Yeah, Brian, you had yours from Teams back in the day, so that was 2008, I think? Yeah, 9, okay. So we won't go into too much detail about what subsea is. This is not a technical presentation. It's more an overview of what subsea is, what the components are that make up the architecture. And in essence, what we have is two plants, a wet plant and a dry plant. The wet plant is anything that is obviously submerged in the sea. The dry plant, on the other hand, is anything that is on land. That's why it's called dry. So when you hear anybody saying wet plant, dry plant, that's the difference that they mean. On the wet side, we have obviously the cable, which is the business end of things. We've also then got the repeaters, which is the amplification. We've also got the BU, which is the branching unit. We'll talk about that in a bit. On the dry side, we have the beach manhole, the cable landing station, the power feeding equipment, and the submarine line terminal equipment. We'll go through each of those in a bit. So obviously, the goods is the cable. The cable is not just a cable. It is a thick piece of wire, especially on the shore side, to prevent accidents from fishing activity and that sort of thing. And then obviously, as it goes deeper into the ocean, it's a lot thinner to minimize costs, because the thicker the cable is, the more expensive it is to construct. It has multiple layers of protection, so to insulate, obviously, from the harshness of the sea. It also includes the electrical conductor. Typically, it's copper, but also nowadays it's aluminum or aluminium, whichever side of the hemisphere you're from. And that's what drives electricity through the amplifiers that are laid along with the cable. That's the only way to get power to the amplifiers. There's, for the moment, no way to generate power from underneath the sea as far as we know. It also then includes the fiber, the actual fiber strands, and these can be anywhere from 2 fiber pairs all the way up to 24 fiber pairs, and potentially in the future all the way up to 40 fiber pairs. And this cable obviously can be laid as deep as close to 9,000 meters. We then have the repeaters. So repeater is a bit of a misnomer, because back in the old days, it was an actual repeater where you regenerated and retimed the signal. Obviously, with improvements in technology, you don't have to regenerate anymore up to maybe, anywhere, let's say subsea, even as long as, 10,000 kilometers. So because you don't have to regenerate, you only have to amplify, it's really an amplifier. But you know how it is in this world of ours. When you get used to a terminology, it doesn't go away. So we still call it repeaters. And if you hear somebody saying repeater, it actually technically is not a repeater. But because that's the lingo, we still call it a repeater. Technically, it's just an amplifier. And obviously, this is built into the cable. So as you can see, that's the repeater. And then on either side is the cable. So it's built into the cable. And then it's built, depending on the application, could be every 50 kilometers, 60 kilometers, 100 kilometers, depends on the application. And obviously, for the amplification is obviously to maintain the quality of the optical signal for thousands of kilometers. That's why we amplify. And like we saw yesterday, if you build a festoon, which is an unrepeated system, you don't need the repeater. So that's just the cable. The repeater is what limits the life of the system, because it degrades over time. And that's why normally the system is designed for 25 years, let's say. If you don't have a repeater, then obviously the cable can last forever. And yes, it's enclosed in titanium because it's operating at depth. We also have the branching unit. So the branching unit is what is used when you want to divert the signal to another location. So let's say, from Durban to Amanzimtoti, or from Maputo to Dar es Salaam, or from Dar es Salaam to Mombasa. So as it's going along, let's say from Djibouti to Cape Town, for example, you want to drop it along the way. And to drop it along the way, you need a branching unit. That's what it is. The branching unit is nothing more than just a specialized ADM, the add-drop multiplexer. That's really all it is. It could also be a RODM, which is a reconfigurable OADM. It's the same stuff you have on terrestrial, but it's just submerged. It could be either electrically powered or it can be passive, depending on how complex the system is. And also, BUs don't necessarily have to be used day one. So let's say, for example, you want to build a cable and you think there might be a new island popping up in the future and you want to power it, you can put the BU there and just wait for that time. If maybe it's a new market that pops up in Madagascar, let's say, it's not ready for capacity yet, you can plant a BU and then build the branch later on. We then have the beach manhole. The beach manhole is slightly bigger than a manhole, but it is a manhole nonetheless. It's essentially where the dry and the wet part meet. So when the cable lands at shore, you pull the cable into the manhole, you drain obviously the wet side, and then the dry side is what's routed into the cable landing station. You don't just pull the cable directly into the landing station. The beach manhole provides a separation between the wet and the dry side while keeping it protected from, the environment, people, that sort of thing. Inside the cable landing station is where all the magic happens. Typical landing stations can be brick and mortar, so buildings that are constructed from scratch that are permanent. Nowadays, they can also be self-contained containers, so with HVAC, cooling, management, racks, etc., all contained in one. A typical container nowadays can go for $1 million, $1.5 million US, which includes everything in there, whereas a permanent structure can be maybe $5 million US to construct, let's say. Inside the CLS is at the bottom left, which you just see is a pile of batteries, equipment, etc. That's what it looks like. In essence, it's a data center, but it's not an open data center. It's really just to land cables. You do get some cable landing stations that will support co-location services to third parties, but that's not typical because they're not designed for that kind of scale. The PFE, which is the power feeding equipment, is what is used to drive electricity through the conductor in the cable. So remember, we can't generate electricity from inside the water. So the PFE resides at the CLSs on a point-to-point segment. So let's say Dar es Salaam to Mombasa. You'll have a PFE in Dar es Salaam, you'll have a PFE in Mombasa. And the way this works is the PFEs are designed to send power equally from both sides. So each side will send 50%. That's the efficient way to do it. However, if one PFE does fail, it's able to power the entire length of the cable, which can happen from time to time. These PFEs are extremely powerful, anywhere from 7.5 kilovolts all the way up to 25 kilovolts. That's 25,000 volts. But because the current is extremely high, the voltage is extremely high, the current is low for where the engineering majors. For those ones, that wasn't me in university. I didn't do that. I just know it. So 1 to 2 amps is just about what you need, and that's enough to drive, let's say, a small Raspberry Pi, for example. It's not a lot of energy, but because of the distance that the cable has to travel, the voltage has to be high to eliminate the degree of loss, because at every point it hits the amplifier, you lose a little bit of voltage. So that's why it's extremely high. It basically takes standard 3-phase and then just transforms and powers it up. Okay. And then the final bit where all the magic happens, which is the optical equipment, which is basically what we call the SLTE, the submarine line terminal equipment. It's just basically the same optical equipment you get on land nowadays. In the old days, it was specialized for subsea, and it was massively expensive. It was extremely huge, and it took up a lot of power. What happened then in 2012 is when the coherent technology came and took over for how you power optical systems. The typical vendors that were producing equipment for terrestrial services decided to get into the subsea space as well. So the majority of subsea optical equipment is actually coming from people that built it for terrestrial services. That means that you can have the same equipment facing wet and facing dry, which makes things extremely easy. It's easy to plan, easy to budget, easy to maintain, etc. And this is the way of the future. Now, this has obviously led to what is known as open cables. An open cable is a cable where one person builds it and then many other people can put equipment on it. And the equipment on it can be from different vendors. You can have Sienna, you can have Infinera, you can have Nokia, you can have all sorts of things. That is what is known as an open cable. 2Africa is an open cable, Equiano is an open cable. Okay? That's the way of the future now, because then you can basically come up with the idea to build the system and then have someone else pay for it. And I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mark, for that thought-provoking presentation. Now we're going to go to questions, comments. In the interest of time, I'll take 2. But before we do that, we're privileged here to have in our presence the Director General of MACRA, Mr. Daud Suleiman. You are welcome, sir. It's really nice to see you. And so we can now continue to go to the insights or questions or comments as we wrap up today being the final day of the conference. So any questions for Mark? I already saw Tony.
Thanks, Mark. Again, always very fascinating to hear from people who have this level of experience. My question, more to TransmissionCo and just in general, coming from a layman's perspective, not being terrestrial in my whole career. But if you take the use case of Malawi, we are very blessed to be called the host of the calendar lake, right? 365 miles long, 52 miles across. Are there any use cases for companies that do subsea cables doing sort of inland water body laying of cable? And is that a consideration that we should be looking at as a country? Because I'm just thinking about how fantastic it would be. We already heard ESCOM saying that they do a connection to Koma Island using microwave because they don't have the expertise to lay the cable from the mainland to the island. But I'm thinking how fantastic it would be if we had a cable running from, say, Luonde, going all the way up to Tanzania and connecting us to the seaboard from there and branching off along all the different ports we have along the way, and how that would transform connectivity in the country. So is that something that can be done? Are there examples of that having been done in other countries? And is it something we can, sit on our planet here about to push for?
So you mean like over lakes, rivers, that kind of thing?
Yes.
Yeah. So it is being done around the world. So say, for example, there's a big water body like Victoria that you can cut across, let's say, to get from Uganda to Tanzania. So it is a use case, but just as it would be the case for the sea, you have to make a business case for any other water body. So the water body doesn't really matter. If it's a short water body, it doesn't need to be amplified or repeated. It can be an unrepeated system, which is typical for rivers and lakes. But the business case process is the same. You have to get a business case, get someone to fund it, type thing, get some commitments for pre-sales, post-sales, It's the same process, it's just a smaller scale. So where, for example, building a subsea cable from Djibouti, let's say around to Luanda would cost about $500 million. Maybe one across the lake would be, 30, 40 million, let's say. So that's the only difference. It's just a difference of size and scale, but the process would have to be the same. You'd have to look for investors, look for interest, look for people who want to buy into it, get the landing party agreements done with all the various countries or the various towns, complete the EIA, the environmental impact assessments, get the licenses, get MACRA to give you all the approvals, all that sort of thing. So the headaches are the same, just smaller scale.